In this section of our economic tutorials, we're going to talk about the topic of something called equilibrium. Equilibrium. That's where we're going. To pick up where we left off, demand curves look like this, and supply curves look like this. Now let me tell you a personal story. In my microeconomics class, I can remember the prof walking into class, putting a price axis here, a quantity axis here, and says, okay, this is demand and this is supply. And then he went on to talk about equilibrium and shortages and surpluses and all that sort of stuff. And I didn't really have a good feel for supply and demand, and I really didn't know why this curve goes from the upper left to the lower right. And in my mind, without knowing the background for why the curves look that way, I said, well, you know, it's kind of subjective here. I could put P and Q here, and I could say, that's the demand curve, and this is a supply curve. There, you can draw your demand and supply curves, and I've drawn mine, and now we're equal. Your opinion is as good as my opinion. I was missing something. It wasn't subjective. I thought, you know, you can draw whatever. Tell me why those curves look the way they look, and I'll tell you why I think my curves look the way mine do. Well, obviously, hopefully obviously by now, in this series of tutorials, you can't draw demand curves and supply curves like that. It won't work. The only reason that demand curves go from the upper left to the lower right is because that is an accurate reflection of how consumers think in regard to price. And the only reason supply curves go from the upper right to the lower left is because that accurately reflects the way producers think. One has a negative slope, one has a positive slope, because they think differently about changes in price. So if we have a curve like the demand curve, which has a negative slope, and a curve like the supply curve, which has a positive slope, we know if this whiteboard here was expanded to whatever dimensions needed, we'd know by logical deduction that those two curves must cross. I mean, if I took this curve and I walked and walked and walked and walked this direction, would they still cross? Yeah, because this curve just keeps going and going and going. But if I take the supply curve and walk in this direction, do they still cross? Yeah, they do, because this curve just keeps on going too. So the point is that if we have a positive sloping curve and a negative sloping curve, they have to cross. They must cross. We're building this model for the purpose of analyzing the way people think. And to the extent that all other things being equal, ceteris paribus, when the price rises, people buy less, quantity demand goes down, and when the price falls, they buy more. We call that the law of demand because we haven't seen any exceptions to it. It happens, as long as you hold other things constant, it happens that way every time. It happens that way if you're in a submarine. It happens that way on Wednesday nights. It happens that way in the wintertime. It happens that way no matter what religion you have or what biological heritage you have. We haven't seen an exception, so we didn't vote on it, but it's not the theory of demand. We call it the law of demand because we don't see any exceptions to it. In the same way, we have the law of supply, that this is the way consumers think. And that's why this curve must go up. Now, if they cross, they must cross, and where they cross is called an equilibrium point. An equilibrium point. Now, that's a very significant point. Our model here, and again, our model is an abstraction. Our model is not real life. Our model is a theory, is a model of real life, and to the extent that we have accurately represented how people think as producers and consumers, then our model is going to give us some truth value here. But it's only an abstraction of life. People are a whole lot more complicated than this particular model here. But it helps us understand a particular concept in a way that we wouldn't be able to focus on it very well if we didn't have our model. So our model is very helpful. So what does it say? What is our model telling us in terms of a supply curve and demand curve? Well, it's saying that there is some price level. Some price level that when we come in here, we come in at this price, we hit the demand curve, this D, demand curve, we come straight down and we get a quantity demanded at that price. And if we ask this price and hit the supply curve at that price, lo and behold, we find that there is one and only one price at any one point in time at which quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. There is one and only one price at which quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Now let's raise the price and see if that's true. If we raise the price up here to P1 and we come over here and hit the demand curve, we bounce off and we're going to get a quantity demanded, we'll call that 1. And if we come over here, when we extend it over to the supply curve, again, if we ask this price question, we bounce off the demand curve to get the quantity demanded answer. We ask this price question and we bounce off of the supply curve. We bounce off the supply curve to get a quantity supplied answer. You get quantity supplied off the supply curve, you get quantity demanded off of the demand curve. So if we ask this higher price question, this quantity does not equal that quantity. The quantity supplied is much greater than the quantity demanded. Similarly, if we bring the price down, at this price level, the quantity demanded is going to be greater than the quantity supplied. Point being, there is one and only one price at any one point in time at which quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. I'm just trying to get rid of some of this distracting stuff in here so we can go back to the main point. What does our model say? How do we interpret this? What does equilibrium mean in terms of our supply and demand model? Well, it says that there exists some price whenever we go to a market. Let's say we go to a farmer's market and farmers bring their produce and their lettuce and their cabbages and tomatoes and rutabaga and all those sorts of things, and they want to sell them. Obviously, the people who produce stuff, they want as high a price as they can get for their stuff. They love high prices. But when people come to buy the stuff, they want as low a price as they can possibly get. They don't want to pay any more than they absolutely have to for their tomatoes, for their lettuce, etc. Well, wait a minute. If one group wants a high price and the other group wants a low price, how are they going to get along? How does this work? Our model says that there will be some price. I don't care what market it is. There will be some price at which the price is low enough that somebody will buy it. It's low enough that's not everybody. Most people are going to say, it's too high for me. Nope, nope. And they walk away from the market not very happy. Prices are too high. But there's somebody else who wants to sell their stuff at a high price. But nobody's buying at a high price, and so they keep lowering their price and lowering their price and lowering their price until somebody buys it, and they're not really happy about it, but they need some gas money to get home, and so they'll sell at that price. The majority of the people think that the price is too low or the price is too high, depending on whether consumers or producers, but there are some people, there are a few people, who will trade at that price. They'll trade at that price because it's better off to get some lettuce and take it home rather than no lettuce and take it home. And there's some producers that said, well, I'd rather sell something to pay for the gas than not sell anything. And they make a trade that is mutually beneficial. How do we know it's mutually beneficial? Because they do it voluntarily. They do it because they want to. They just decided it's in their best interest to do that. Now, when that happens, we say that the market clears. The market clears. Everybody who wants carrots at that price buys all the carrots that they want to buy at that price. And everybody who wanted to sell carrots, sell all the carrots that they want to sell. Here we go. You'll hear me say this over and over. They sell all they want to sell at that price. That there is some price at which a buyer and a seller will meet because they think they're better off, while maybe the majority of the people walk away saying, no, price is too high or price is too low, etc. I'm not happy. Now, where those buyers and those sellers meet in terms of price is called the equilibrium price. This is the market price. So if we say, well, what is the price of carrots? We'd have to say, well, where was the last trade of carrots and how many dollars went one way for a dozen carrots to go the other way? And we call that price. The number of dollars it takes to get a certain amount of goods is what we call price. Price is a ratio. Price is an exchange ratio. It says that $3 going into the gas station attendant's hands will get us 1 gallon of gasoline. So if that's the price, if that's the amount of dollars that it takes to get 1 gallon, we call that the price per gallon. Now, things start to get good because now we have an equilibrium point, which means we have an equilibrium price, but we also have an equilibrium quantity. In other words, it says there's a group of people here that they were willing to exchange at that price, and this is the quantity that was exchanged at that price level. At that price level. Now let's go to the next point. The next point is that most economists, when you ask them a question, well, what's going to happen if Iran bottles up the Straits of Hormuz and crude oil can't come from the Middle East? What's going to happen to the price of gasoline, and what's going to happen to the equilibrium quantity? Are we're going to have enough gasoline or not? Well, whenever we ask that kind of question, what will happen is the economist will probably want to grab something like this and want to run to some little whiteboard and put a line here and call this price and a line here and call this quantity and draw this line called demand and draw this called supply, and now turn around and say, now what was your question again? Because until we do this, we're not really able to have the mental tools to answer the question. Now, some of these economists are really, really good. In other words, they've got this embedded, imprinted in their mind. And so now we can start moving these curves all over the place, and they're moving them in their mind, and they're looking right past us here, and they can see where they're going, and they can answer on the fly. But for people like me, and for people like you, when you take a test, when in doubt, draw it out and let the graph tell you the answer. Don't guess. There's no question on here about supply and demand and quantity and shortages and surpluses that's not already in the graph, and you let the graph tell you the answer. So let's say, for instance, that happens. Let's say that right now negotiations with Iran are going pretty well, but let's just say they go back to normal and they go lousy again, and all of a sudden it starts bottlenecking some oil that comes out of the Middle East, and supply gets cut off. Now that's going to be a reduction in supply. What will happen to the equilibrium price, and what will happen to the equilibrium quantity of gasoline and oil sold if all of a sudden the supply of oil gets cut off? I know we can guess at it, but let's let the graph tell us. That means that before it got cut off, there was an equilibrium price. We'll call it price 1. We'll call this point 1 and equilibrium point 1. And now the economist says, now, what are you saying is happening in the Middle East now? Oh, they're cutting off the oil. We can't get the big super tankers through to get it over here to get it refined. Oh, so the supply of oil is going to decline, you say? Yeah. So it's going to go from S to S1. Now notice what happened. When we move the curve to the left, that is a decrease in supply. I didn't say a decrease in quantity supplied. I said a decrease in supply. We're trying to be precise with our terms here. Now, when we have a decrease in supply and demand has not changed, we go from point 1 in Q1 to point 2. Now notice, I'm going to leave this supply curve here. Well, maybe I won't. But you can only have one demand curve at a time, and you can only have one supply curve at the time. So when we go from S to S1, in your mind at least, erase S1. Just kind of erase it because it doesn't exist anymore. But we need the memory of it. We need the faint memory of it. And so we'll just kind of leave it just a little bit like that, because we know what the price was, and we know how much was traded in the marketplace. But now we've got a new supply curve, and at that new supply curve, we're going to have a P2 and a Q2. Now we're ready to let this graph tell us the answer of what's going to happen to price and what's going to happen to quantity if they begin to cut off the Straits of Hormuz and we can't get our super tankers out of the Middle East. We know that the price is going to go from P1 to P2, so we know that the price is going to go up, and we know that the amount of oil that people consume, the amount of gasoline that people consume, is going to go down. I'm giving you a real simple model here because it's going to get more sophisticated, but we got to do the simple ones first. So we let the graph tell us what's going to happen if we decrease supply and demand stays the same. And the answer is, well, we know that we're going to go from point 1, the first equilibrium point, to the new equilibrium point, which means the price is going to go from the old price to the new price, which means it must go up. And also means that it's going to go from the old quantity exchanged in the marketplace, which was a high number, and we're going to go to a quantity that's exchanged, which is a lower number. So the economist is moving this around and says, oh, well, if they cut that off, the price is going to go up, and people are not going to they're not going to buy as much gasoline. It's not there. They can't buy it. The quantity is going to go down. Now that's one illustration, and we're going to make them more and more complicated as we go. But this section's about long enough, and we'll pick up with doing some more exercises with equilibrium, with changes of supply and demand in the next session.